Everyone's talking about the rematch between Chris Eubank Jr. and Conor Benn like it's a 50-50 fight. But I'm going to tell you why, from a tactical standpoint, it is far from it. The reality is that Eubank Jr. actually figured out Conor Benn halfway through their fight. But the problem was, he figured him out a little bit too late. Conor Benn was having success, but then there was a key adjustment. And once you spot that adjustment, it completely changes the way that you view the rematch.
Yes, he got the victory, but I figured it could be a little bit more of easier fight this time.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to A Guy Called Henry. I hope you're all doing incredibly well. If you haven't been here before, this channel is all about boxing, analysis, breakdowns, tactics, all that great stuff. Now, this fight was incredibly interesting from a tactical standpoint. Yes, there was all the drama and conversation around how hydrated Eubank Jr. was. It did seem his energy levels depleted far faster than you would normally expect from him, and that is a whole nother topic of conversation. I really do view all that stuff as what is the leveler in this fight. Because even though Eubank Jr. was getting it very wrong, in my opinion, early on in this one, despite winning rounds, I think he could have made it a hell of a lot easier for himself. He did figure it out eventually, and I'm going to show you how. So early on in the fight, Eubank Jr. was winning the rounds and dominating with his lead hand, with his jab. He was doing a fantastic job of landing on Conor Benn as Conor Benn was trying to enter the pocket. He was throwing many more lead hands than Conor was, and he definitely was up on the scorecards. He was also doing a very good job of using his lead hand as a hook. He was countering with the check left hook as a counter shot, although I'd say that he was probably spamming this shot a little bit too much. But early on, this was all Eubank Jr. had to do. He just had to use that lead hand. However, we got to round 3, and Conor Benn was able to land a pretty significant right hand and left hook on Chris Eubank Jr. And this was the issue with Eubank Jr. for me in this fight. Whilst we know about the limitations he had on himself physically, there were some very simple things tactically he could have done differently. The first thing I have to say is that Eubank Jr. simply was not moving his feet enough. For a man the stature of Conor Benn to be able to get into the pocket and land on Chris Eubank Jr., it's something that Jr. really shouldn't have allowed. I felt that he was far too lackadaisical with his foot movement. It meant that Conor Benn was able to stay in range far more regularly than a man of his size should versus Eubank. And it ultimately reduced the availability of counterpunches for Eubank Jr. When you counterpunch, you need to be able to watch them moving into your space, and if they're close already, it's much harder to time your counters. Conor Benn is a lunging fighter, so if you move your feet more, then he will be forced to cover that distance. It also means that you just don't get hit as easily. The second thing that frustrated me about Eubank in this fight, watching him, was how lazy he was with bringing his lead hand back up to his chin. His guard was just not good enough. If you watch here in round 1 of their fight, right from the beginning this was working for Conor Benn. You see there's a decent gap between them here. Conor Benn dips down to load his legs. And you can see how wide his stance here is. His balance isn't particularly good. But watch, as he throws his backhand, he hits Eubank Jr. clean. But why does this happen? Look where Eubank Jr.'s hand is. There's absolutely no reason for his hand to be there. If I just take it back slightly as well, you can see that Eubank Jr. stepped forward, as has Conor Benn. So now Conor Benn is well in range to land his straight right hand. Eubank Jr.'s lead hand is low. He's tried to pull back, but Conor Benn's relatively faster. He's faster than Eubank Jr., and a lot of that has to do with the natural size difference. But watch, he chucks that in and he cracks him on the chin with it. Completely preventable if Eubank Jr. is adjusting his feet a little bit more, and indeed just has his hand up. He shouldn't be getting hit with single right hands like that. And this happened multiple times throughout the fight. Eubank Jr. carrying that lead hand low or throwing a jab and finishing with his lead hand low, and Conor Benn countering over the top of it with his right hand. It was the #1 way that Conor Benn was able to hit Eubank Jr., and it was his most effective scoring shot by quite a long distance. Now, there's two parts to this. Of course, Eubank Jr., yes, as I've just mentioned, he carried his lead hand much too low for the majority of the fight. But there's another thing here that was a problem, and it was something he figured out later in the fight. But early on when I was watching this back, I'd kind of forgotten exactly how things went, and I just couldn't believe how little he was using this, his right hand. And you might wonder why I'm particularly concerned by Eubank Jr.'s right hand being inactive early in the fight. What does that matter? Conor Benn's, coming in, he's chucking his right hand. Well, for me, that right hand is the deterrent. As you heard Conor Benn's coach say at the end of round 1.
When you're coming in from that side, he's only going to throw the left hook at you, so you roll underneath it and come back.
So you can see that they're not concerned about the Eubank Jr. right hand. They're saying he only is going to throw a left hook. It's predictable Benn can roll underneath that left hook quite comfortably at times. But when you watch the way that Benn enters, when you watch the way he leads off with that straight right hand, you've got to provide a deterrent. And honestly, it frustrated the hell out of me watching the fight back, going, why is he not throwing the right hand? Because Conor Benn, watch, I'll show you this again, watch. As he enters, he dips down. I want to show you something here about this dip that he does. Let's draw a line. he doesn't move his head off that line. It's only as he starts to throw that right hand that the head moves slightly. But the thing is that if Eubank Jr. was sharper and he saw the right hand going, he could time that and he could let his own right hand go down the middle and get his own head off the line as he throws it, so that Conor Benn completely misses with that right hand. Now, because he's not maintained the gap, he's got less time to read what's happening and less time to prepare a counter punch. So the first thing is he's got to maintain the gap. If you've been on this channel before, you'll have heard me talking about making those little small steps to create the half spaces. It's the counter puncher's half space that is required to be able to fire off counter punching work, making your opponent fall short and then punishing them. The second thing is he's got to keep his hands up, at least early in the fight, and we've got something interesting to talk about with that later. I've made a discovery about Eubank Jr. from a previous camp with his current trainer Bomac, which is very interesting. But the lack of right-hand threat from Eubank Jr. just made Ben so confident stepping in and throwing shots, keeping his head largely on the line as well. It wasn't until round 5 of the fight where I finally saw Eubank throwing an effective 1-2. And this scenario here also shows you why the right hand is super important in assisting that low lead. The increased space, the extra foot movement allows you to deal with that single right hand. It allows you to time that and counter that appropriately. The right hand following Eubank's lead hand allows him to finish with that lead hand low because it draws the counter from Conor Benn, this right hand over the top that he landed consistently throughout the fight. By throwing the 1-2, by following up your own right hand, I'm going to show you here exactly why it prevents Conor Benn from being able to land his right hand counter over the top. So you can see here, Conor Benn's pulling backwards, and I'm just going to stop it here. So there's a bit of gap between them, but Eubank Jr. is clearly in range. And you can see he's got that low lead hand, so Conor Benn will be aware of that. He will know Eubank Jr. wants to throw the lead hand, he'll be preparing his counter shot. So watch, Eubank Jr. throws the jab, which Conor Benn blocks, or half blocks, it does slightly get through. Watch Conor Benn's right hand, just to make my point. Now look, the second that jab lands, Conor Benn, you can see he's turning his right hand over to try and land the shot over the top, because the lead hand of Eubank Jr. is low. But if I just wind it back slightly, Eubank Jr. for one of the first times in the fight, he's following it straight up with the 2, and because he's got the speed of the momentum of it being combination, his right hand will always land before Ben's does. Watch. 2, bosh, right on the chin, and then Conor Benn misses his own right hand to the side of Eubank Jr.'s head because he's been hit. It messes up the trajectory of his own right hand. And then we see this sequence of 1-2s that follow in round number 7, and again in round 8. In fact, I think this one here is an even better example of how it prevents that counter right hand from Ben. You'll see Eubank steps into that jab, it hits the gloves, and then he instantly follows that right hand, and look, he hits him clean on the chin. You can see Conor Benn was preparing that right hand over the top, but if you look, because Eubank Jr. is throwing his own right hand, his headland ends up over to the side further, this way. So watch that. Boom, his head ends up down there. Conor Benn's right hand completely misses, he completely overthrows it. However, just to illustrate my point that again, all these techniques, come together in combination. You need them all to be knitted together for these things to work. Eubank Jr., once again, he does throw the 1-2 here. So watch, he extends that lead hand, which hits Conor Benn on the head. He comes back with the 2 here, which Conor Benn manages to, he does actually get caught there, Conor Benn, so he lands that 1-2. But because Eubank tends to overthrow that right hand at times, he ends up with all his weight on his front foot here. You can see he's moving around. He's got a bit stuck. He's trying to come back up, and as he does, look where his hands are. Low, low. Conor Benn slings in that right hand, and he cracks him on the side of the head. It's not a good moment for Eubank Jr. So these things will work as long as the technique is correct. And look, the reason I'm talking about the right hand so much, the reason I feel like it's the key is because Eubank was absolutely winning the battle of the lead hands. I feel like he already has that down. But he's got to figure out how to score more effectively on Ben and also prevent Ben from scoring those big right hands on him. And I think this is how you do it. So what did I mean in my intro when I said that Eubank Jr. had figured it out, but it was too late? Well, as you can see, he did figure it out. The things I was thinking watching the early rounds, Eubank Jr. started to do all by himself, although I think there's a couple more things he can add to that I'll talk about later in the video. But basically, the issue was that by the time he'd worked this out, I don't think he had enough gas left in the tank. Because when you go back and watch the technique on those right hands, when you watch how he threw them, there really wasn't much power on them. And look, Eubank Jr. has never been a big single shot puncher. Eubank Jr. has always been an accumulative puncher that causes damage by landing lots of punches on you. But even by his standards, I thought there was very, very little power in those shots. I definitely think he can hit harder and with better technique than he showed in this Conor Benn fight. And honestly, I do worry about how much energy will be in his legs. I really do. Because you could see from 9 onwards, it was too late for him to continue to implement these tactics. There was a moment in round 10 when they were in the open ring and Eubank Jr. gets hit with a clean counter. And I can see at this point, even though he's figured out what he needs to do, he physically cannot find the energy to box in the middle of the open ring. As soon as it was open at that point in the fight, it was a problem for him because he was falling off balance. He was just too tired. He wasn't hurt, but he was exhausted. And so he was having to take some big punches because of that. The way he combated this was to get up close to more Conor Benn and turn it into a real war up close, use his size, and he got it down the stretch. He won the last 2 rounds. It made it a more comfortable decision for me. I think I scored the fight 117, 111, something like that. I would need to go back and check my scorecard. And if you were planning on watching Chris Eubank Jr. versus Conor Benn, I've got a link for you for DAZN in the description. If you like what I'm doing on this channel, if you like what happens in this video, then I would love it if you would use that. It helps to support the channel. If you buy the pay-per-view using my link, I think it's going to be a great fight and I'd really appreciate it. So the question for me really is, if Eubank Jr. knows what needs to be done now, if there's a few other things we could add into that, which I'm going to show you now, then can he get the win more comfortably this time? Can he even potentially knock Conor Benn out? That's the question for me when it comes to the tactical makeup of this fight. Where I want to go for this, and it's for very good reason, is the rematch that he had against Liam Smith. The reason I want to go there is because it was a good performance from Eubank Jr. And it was one where he corrected a lot of the mistakes he made in the first fight, where he looked sharp, he looked disciplined, and most importantly, he had Bomac in his corner. Now, Bomac, for those of you that don't know, is Terence Crawford's coach, and he joined up with Eubank Jr. for the Liam Smith rematch. He had some legal issues, which is why I think he wasn't there for the first Benn fight. But they've got that ironed out now, and he's training Eubank Jr. for this rematch. But I found this really interesting clip of Eubank Jr. in training camp with Bomac in preparation for that Liam Smith fight.
Get that left hand up a little more this first round till you get real comfortable, until the sparring session settle. Bring that hand back. Bring that jab hand back. He looking for the counter. Not bad, not bad. Only thing I see is you drop your hand a little bit after they come back, especially when you're close. That's when you get to coming over the top. Instead of falling in, you take the half a step back. Boom, boom, take the half a step back. He gonna be out of range anyway because his hands are small. Stay on top of your boxing and just step over.
So you can hear it there. Bomac has actually called out some of the things that Chris is doing that I've mentioned in this video, things that I want him to work on to do better. And interestingly, Bomac says, keep that lead hand high just early, just while you work things out. And I like that because at the end of the day, they do actually want Benn to try and throw that right hand because then you can time him. You actually want him to encourage, you want to draw that out of him. You want to encourage him to throw that shot. You know he's going to do it. If you move your feet enough, you know he's going to do it from too far out. Then you can counter him. Another thing that Conor Benn did well in this fight was he did jab to the body quite well. He'd lunge in with that. And everything Conor Benn does is very lunging, especially if you make sure there's a distance between you. And I just have to say while we're here that this moment reminds me so much of the way that Terence Crawford was counter-punching against Errol Spence, where he was lunging in with the low jabs to the body and Terence Crawford was making him pay. Maybe Bomac can impart a bit of this into Eubank Jr. There's 2 things that are specific to Bomac that I think are very interesting here. One, I thought that in that Liam Smith rematch, Eubank Jr. used very nice lateral movement. He was constantly circling Liam Smith, constantly on the move, constantly creating a bit of a gap and forcing Liam Smith to have to close him down. Eubank Jr. was then keeping him busy and mindful as he was walking down with his own lead hand, with his jab. And he was landing vicious combination punches when Liam Smith was finally getting into range because he had time to think about it. He also landed a very nice uppercut, and Chris did land a couple of uppercuts on Conor Benn in this fight, but Conor Benn dips down a lot. He dips forward lots. And I do think Chris should be able to hit him with more uppercuts. I do think it is a case of just walking Conor Benn onto something. I really do think he can do that, as I say, if he creates that space. Because Conor Benn loves to dip underneath Eubank's jab. But look, you can see in that clip that Eubank Jr., even though he was told by Bomac to get his hand up after he threw the jab, to not be lazy with his lead hand positioning, that he still kept doing it. And this is the problem with Eubank Jr. It's the thing everyone's always said about him, is this guy does not listen. He's been called untrainable by certain people. And I do think he probably is quite rigid and quite stubborn. I think it is hard to get him to do what you want, but I do have high confidence that he can do that because of how he went and performed in that Liam Smith rematch. He had his hands up, he was moving laterally, all the things that Bomac was wanting him to do in that training session, all the things that I want him to do having watched the first fight with Conor Benn back. But the elephant in the room is this. Chris Eubank Jr., when he fought Liam Smith, did not have a rehydration clause, and there were rumors that Liam Smith had an injury going into that fight. So he may have flattered to deceive in that sense, but one thing I will say for sure is that he looked a lot sharper, a lot fresher, a lot quicker, and he had a higher energy output, that is for sure, consistently throughout that fight. My concern is after Liam Smith won that maybe his punch resistance has gone a bit because he's been in the game for a long time now. That punch resistance is certainly further reduced by the weight cut, and his output in the ring is further reduced by the weight cut, as is his ability to move and use his legs. And that was what I said after that fight in my reaction video, you probably will remember. And that is what this will all come down to. I'm not making my prediction right now. You might be watching this thinking, but Henry, you've only really spoken about Chris and what he can do better. There is a couple of things I think Conor Benn can change. I certainly think the trajectory of which he throws that right hand needs to change, because at the moment, it's too predictable. Chris started to dip underneath it with regularity. If he can change that up, I think that will really, really help him. I also think he needs to jab his way into range a bit more. I think he could do well to utilize a flicker jab and to pendulum step his way in, not be quite so lunging. I think his feints are good, but overall, I just feel that Chris Eubank Jr. has all the tools, if he can box discipline, to beat Conor Benn. But as we saw in that first fight, Chris Eubank Jr. makes mistakes, and that's the point of this video. I'm saying he needs to not make these mistakes. For Conor Benn, I just think he is what he is. I don't think he's got that much ability. I don't think he gets his head off the line enough. That is another change he could potentially make, but I've seen him do this in every single fight that he's been in, whereas I have seen Chris Eubank Jr. do the things I'm talking about better. So for me, tactically, it's Chris Eubank Jr.'s fight to lose, but I can't in good faith predict this fight yet because I just don't know where he's at physically. Is he going to abide by that rehydration clause? And do I think he's even going to be tactically disciplined enough when he is fresh enough in the fight to go in there and execute what needs to be done? I think adding Bomac back into the mix gives me a lot more confidence he can, but I guess we'll see. But for me, the big thing, one of the biggest things, is what his corner said to him at the end of round one.
I like the way you're working, but you don't have to go to him. He's coming to you. Just sit there and pick him apart.
And I think that that's key, because at the end of the day, Eubank Jr. isn't going to have all the energy he possibly could in there because he is getting older. Making 160 is getting harder. And if he does do that rehydration clause, he needs to factor that into the way he boxes. So guess what? Let him come to you. He will come to you. You don't have to force the issue. And I felt that there were times in there when Junior got countered and got reckless because he was trying to force the issue. I think he did genuinely believe that when he hit Benn, Benn would start to give in. But he knows now that's not the case. And I think he can let Conor Benn burn himself in there with a smart game plan with well-timed counters. I think Bomac's the perfect coach for Eubank Jr. to coach these, to drill these counters. And with that body jab, for example, if Chris Eubank Jr. is moving his feet better, he's creating the space. We saw how Terence Crawford was able to absolutely dominate Errol Spence Jr. with counters in that fight. Honestly, just create the space, make him throw, make him lunge, make him overcommit, and then counter him. It will be exactly the same with Conor Benn if Chris Eubank Jr. can find the timing right on these counters. At least try and do them. So yeah, I'm confident that what Bomac said is right, that Chris Eubank Jr. can make this fight quite a bit easier for himself. I think that Chris Eubank Jr. did, as he say in the face-off, learn quite a lot from that first fight. And I guess we'll see whether or not he can implement those tactics. But maybe more importantly than anything, we need to see what kind of physical condition he's in before we try and pick this one. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to use my link to buy the fight via DAZN. Don't forget to smash the like button if you've liked this. Don't forget to subscribe to a guy called Henry if you're new. And let me know what you make of what I've observed in the comments section below. And as I always say, on to the next one.